What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? Today is field trip day. We are going to take a field trip from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I'm from, where the beer mug is, the little blue dot, and we're going to cross the pond known as Lake Michigan and head over to Michigan. Well, I didn't take the ferry over because it's too expensive. I drove, but we're going to Muskegon, Michigan to take a look at some cool relics of the past from World War II. So let's get into it. So for today's video, we're going to do sort of like a side quest. I actually came to Muskegon, Michigan to look at something entirely different than what we're going to look at in this video. I happened to read online that it was worth a stop to go check out this ship that we're on, and I gotta say, they definitely were right. So thanks to all the Yelp reviews that gave this place a great review and said it was worth a stop. 100% it was. It's probably one of the only times that I've been pleasantly surprised at how cool something is. Normally I take a sidestep somewhere and then I'm disappointed. So a quick disclaimer, as I put in most of these videos I do on relics of the past. Number one, I was never in the military and I don't have a background in the military, so expect me to call certain things by the wrong name. I look at things from the welding and welding technology aspect, not military history. So if you're looking for 100% factual, correct terms, yada, 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 this probably isn't the video for you. But if you're interested in how they welded these together, or you just like cool shit like me, then stick around. We are taking a look at the USS LST-393. It is one of a handful, I believe maybe only two, remaining tank transport ships from World War II. Basically was used to transport heavy equipment as well as troops across the ocean, and it had the capability of landing on a beach. I 100% recommend that you take a look at the LST-393's website to gain more information on this, or even better, go see it in person. Now, speaking of seeing it in person, in this video, I'm going to cover a lot of pictures of just welds in certain areas of the ship. I am not going to be covering a tour of this, and I'm going to leave out a lot of the stuff that you probably would want to see if you actually went on board this. And part of the reason why I do this is, well, my channel is about welding, and I only really care about the welds, but I want to give you guys a reason to actually go out and see these things, because if it wasn't for people patronizing them and paying admission fees, something like this wouldn't exist anymore. So I don't want to take away from their income stream by giving a tour of something, especially because I'm not the best at understanding or knowing everything about what the ship was used for. I'm mainly focusing on the welds. All right, well, let's take a look at those welds. As with all World War II ships, a majority of everything you're going to find on this is all stick welded. Based on all the welds I've seen on old ships from World War II, it appears they use like a 6011, 6010 type electrode for the stick rod because of the way the welds look. Occasionally I see evidence of something that would look like 7014, so a smoother bead, but for the most part, a majority, aka 90% plus, is all stick welded on these old ships, and this is no exception. One of the things you have to be careful of when you look at old ships like this, or any kind of heavy equipment that's been around for 70 plus years, is it's difficult to tell what's original and what's not. Now this picture is a prime example. I don't think that that door right there was in the side of the hull when it was made, so clearly that was an addition after the fact when it was turned into a museum. So that's pretty obvious, but repair work can be done on paneling and on the hull and even on a lot of other things on any kind of old military equipment, so it can be difficult to determine if what you're looking at is original or not. One of the best ways to gauge if something's original is to see if it stands out. Like this right here, which is a panel that was welded in, the welds themselves don't look out of place for anything else on the ship, so they're likely original. If you start seeing things that look like MIG welds, aka very long welds that are very smooth, and you have what appears to be real rough stick welds, like these are all done with stick welding, right next to it, odds are the MIG welds are not original because that technology wasn't used in the early 40s. The overall exterior hull of this ship was pretty roughly welded. No doubt it held, and no doubt it probably didn't take on water at any point, but the beads are pretty rough. There is a lot of like what I would consider underfilling, where the weld is simply not big enough. It doesn't have enough reinforcement. A lot of undercut in spots. But again, we got to remember the time frame that this was built, the technology and the skilled labor just wasn't there. So the overall results honestly are better than I would have expected given that. Another thing I'll mention is that the welds, like in this picture, look a little bit rough, but a lot of that is the probably 15 coats of paint that are on this. I didn't realize how much the paint could change the appearance of the weld until I saw a weld with the paint chipped off, and it's pretty crazy. Here's a picture of that. The paint can make a weld look far smoother than it was originally, and it can also make it look far more lumpy than it actually was. And again, even though the surface finish of that weld seems rough where the paint is peeled up, that's just how the weld looks like when you use a 6010 or 6011 stick rod. It doesn't make smooth welds, so a lot of people are looking for smooth welds and they think that anything other than that is like a defect, but that's simply just not the case. This is a pretty typical weld on this ship, and this really is a great example of most of what I've seen in World War II era ships. Modern day, you'll see a lot cleaner welds simply because the training, technology, and people with skill are just easier to come by and more prevalent. Being that I weld pipe for a living now, I got a kick out of this. As soon as I saw this pipe up against the wall and it had 3 stringers on it, I knew 2 things. One, that was welded in place because of those stringer beads. You don't generally do that unless you have to because it really sucks to weld like that. And 2, I knew that the backside of that weld was going to be really rough because of how hard of a time the guy had trying to weld the backside of it. So let's take a look at that. As you can see, it's pretty rough. Little bit of a missed tie in there, real lumpy. This, hey, shit happens, right? I've been in more than a few places where it's almost impossible to get a clean weld on something like this because it's so close to the wall. That's why you got to plan ahead and weld stuff on a bench or make a hard weld to where you're not welding it in position. But props to whoever welded it, it didn't leak apparently, so that's a plus. One of the things I kind of find surprising is that even though they're using fast freezing rods, they tend to do horizontal stringers and vertical weaves. Technically, horizontally, they could have done a weave with that rod and it would have looked okay. So I'm not really sure why they did the stringers. I will say that the stringers are probably a little bit easier to keep from the molten puddle dripping, but horizontal stringers on a lot of things, especially pipe, are actually pretty hard to make look decent. One of the more surprising things I found on this ship were quite a number of wall welds and floor welds that looked just like this. Now, in first glance, you would assume that this would be a wire process. The problem is that gas shielded MIG didn't exist in the 40s, the early 40s anyways, and flux core self-shielded patents existed, and there is evidence that it was used for certain jobs, possibly as early as 42, 43. However, that doesn't fit within the realm of what we're looking at. This doesn't look like a gasless flux core weld. This looks like a MIG weld. So I think one of 2 things we're looking at. One, it's what's known as submerged arc welding, which basically is a wire process that uses granular flux that dumps out around the wire. That could have welded this, which would make sense because it's a super straight long weld. The other possibility would be some kind of rod like 7024 or jet rod or something like that that was, I don't know, 2 to 3 foot long rod for stick welding was used for this, and someone was really good at making a straight line. I'll show other pictures of very similar welds and maybe you can give your thoughts on what you think it is. But based on what I saw, the only feasible way that I believe this could exist would be submerged arc welding. The problem is submerged arc welding doesn't generally make welds that narrow. You would be putting down a lot more metal in that. So I don't really know what to say about that. It was super common on the floor and on the walls to see basically hand done welds and then something that could have been machined. Now, this weld had what appeared to be signs of possible starts and stops, or at least where it's a little bit lumpier. So it's possible that that was hand done too, but I don't understand why the welds look so much different than the average one. Like they'll be super straight, narrow, and they don't even really look like stick welds. So they're definitely using some form of a longer rod or sub-arc or something. I thought this guy right here was pretty interesting. I'm 99% sure that rough spot on the left part of the pipe was actually repair where they ground it and then welded over possibly a leak because it was so out of place to the rest of the weld on that pipe. This was welded really good, likely done on a bench, but whoever welded that did a hell of a good job. This is what I call the fitter special. It's probably pretty hard to tell in the video, but every fitting on this is actually misaligned. My guess is their measurements were a bit off, and when they went to tie this all together, they realized there were about 3/8 to ½ inch of misalignment with everything, so they ended up saying, screw it, we'll weld it, which makes sense. Hey, it's wartime, and it probably isn't a critical component anyways, but I thought it was pretty interesting because of how much misalignment is in everything. That's why there's so much weld, and it's at angles and everything. Like, hey, you got to do what you got to do. Luckily, I have a pretty good fitter, so I don't have to worry about that too much. This is a pretty good Gangster weave. 9 out of 10. It was real clean, no defects. Like it. I made a pit stop in the engine room, and I gotta say, this is the best smelling engine room I have ever smelled in these videos. The video I did on a German submarine, the U-boat that's in Chicago, definitely smelled good, but I'm not joking. This is better. This is like a well-oiled machine shop mixed with diesel, mixed with heavy machining. Like, I love the smell in here. I wish I could get it as a cologne. I'm not joking. 10 out of 10 for engine room smell. This is as good as it gets. I also forgot to mention earlier in the video, but you're basically free to walk around anywhere on this ship that you want, so it's pretty cool because you don't even need a tour guide or anything. You just walk around and look at what you want to look at. My kind of place. Smells like heaven in here. One thing that's cool for me is that I don't really research any of these places that I visit, any of the old equipment or ships, so I'm always surprised at what I find. I knew right away that this was a supercharger, and I knew that the engine in this thing, it actually had two main engines, looked familiar, and upon, I guess, further review, I looked into it a little bit after visiting it. They're locomotive engines. When I was a lot younger, I had an opportunity to check out a bunch of train engines and the mechanics behind them and the diesel-electric hybrids and all that stuff. So I had seen engines like this. I just didn't really realize it when I was in there. I knew they were familiar. I just didn't know what they were from. And it makes total sense. I mean, use something that's readily available to put in a ship like this. There's no reason to engineer a specific power plant for this, especially when it's wartime and time is of the essence. You can't be spending all that engineering time for something when an off-the-shelf engine might work. One of the things that's always amazed me is how, despite this being, 70, 80 plus years old, that a vast majority of the piping on this ship, as well as other ships I've seen, would actually pass for more modern day piping. Now, we don't use rods like they did back then anymore. We use stronger, like 7018 rods. But for the most part, all of the piping on this ship, especially in the engine room, was free of defects, or at least most defects were pretty clean and clearly done by somebody with a lot of skill. which today is far easier to find people with pipe welding skills. Back in the 40s, most of the guys that had that skill probably would have been out at war. Not to mention, welding hadn't been around for that long. So to have anyone with enough skill to weld pipe at that point is pretty amazing that they were able to come up with people. Now, no, not all the piping was welded perfect. I mean, the bottom of the pipe's a little bit rough, which is kind of the bane of anyone who welds pipe for a living. The goal is to make the bottom of the pipe look like the top, and it's far harder than you would think. If you've never welded pipe in position, give it a shot sometime. It'll humble anyone. Here's a structural beam weld, and it's got some undercuts, some lack of fusion, a couple defects in there, but not too bad overall. Some big buckshot BBs here. I'm not really sure why that was there. That someone must have been long arcing it when they were welding it. The flange weld, which was probably done on a bench, looks good. That 45 or 30 degree, whatever it is fitting there, that pipe, that's a little bit rough. But hey, we all have off days, right? I really like that they had the piping blueprint out to where you could actually look at it. That's something neat, and I've never seen blueprints from the 40s for something like this, so it gave me a little bit more insight to the design element behind what we're looking at. One of the things I find to hold true is that a lot of people seem to think that World War II was archaic and people were ignorant and all that. Well, no, they didn't have computers, but they had drafting tables, and people were as intelligent back then as they are today as far as brain functioning. So people figured out ways to get around problems. And to efficiently run piping and electrical, a simple blueprint could do wonders to make something work efficiently. There were a number of diesel engines in this room. I can't remember what they were used for, but possibly pumps or something. If you remember, if you've been here or if you know what these are used for, feel free to leave it in the comments. But it's pretty cool. This room also smelled really good. That horizontal weld on blue-gray column there is a little rough, but the vertical up, looks like vertical up anyways, Gangster weaves are in a corner are looking really good. Whoever did that had some skill. Once again, we see that super narrow, very clean, no ripple stringer on the left side there. Again, that was not done with the normal rods that they welded this ship with, so either they're using a different kind of rod like 7024 or that's some kind of sub-arc weld. I'm not really sure. It's about the width of a nickel or so. If it was a more modern ship, that would be a wire process like MIG all day, but in this case, I'm not really sure. Since I still have you here, could you shut off the red-handled valve for me? Thanks, I'd appreciate it. One of the things that always hits home for me checking out these old ships and equipment is how much of what was on there was actually made in my home city of Milwaukee. My grandfather and even my father told stories of every manufacturing plant in the city of Milwaukee producing tanks and stuff for the war effort, and being obviously younger than both of them and not experiencing that firsthand, it kind of almost seemed like a ghost story, like something that didn't even exist. When I see parts of equipment stamped with my hometown on it, I realize that how much Milwaukee, Wisconsin actually helped during World War II. Everything from this simple transformer here all the way up to tanks and even parts of ships were built right where I'm from. I've always liked the hatches on Navy ships. They're just cool looking. I also appreciate that a lot of them had brass parts on it to prevent corrosion due to saltwater exposure. Back when the name stamped on something was where it came from. Nowadays, Cleveland stamped on something means Cleveland, China. These were probably the roughest welds I found on the exterior. I'm not really sure if that's just paint that's spattered around. Looks pretty weird, but rough nonetheless. This was welded really clean. The pictures don't do it justice. Whoever welded this was really skilled and did a really good job. And honestly, based on the tech and the training they had, this thing was built pretty well. Would I take it out to sea at this point? Probably not, but with a decent inspection, maybe a couple quick repairs, I'd give it a shot. Here are a couple more pictures of those super long welds that could be subarc. They have like a peaked triangle shape, which again suggests wire, but I know that gas shielded MIG didn't exist at this point. So really it comes down to one of two things. Either it's subarc or it's some 7024 rod that's 2 to 3 foot long, because many of the welds simply didn't have any starts and stops that were visible. And I get it, some people have said in previous videos, well, they were just so good they hid the start and a stop. It's like, well, when you look at 80 feet of it and you can't find a single start or stop, I would say there's something else going on. It's pretty common too to see where it crisscrosses over another weld, and you'll have one weld that looks like it's done by hand and one by a tracked machine or something.
Now that's a gangster weave.
Now, this gangster weave had a pretty interesting appearance. I'm not really sure, but it might have been knocked down by a grinder, like it probably stuck out further and was rougher than this, and then they flattened it down because the detail of the bead, the ripples, was lost in part of it, so I'm pretty sure they flattened it out to try and make it look better. Overhead welding can be a pain when you don't have the technique down. This is a great example of what happens. You get a bad lack of fusion on the bottom there. Probably wasn't running enough amperage. The vertical up looks clean, or maybe that was vertical down, but that underside there, that's no bueno. One of the things that comes with 6010, 6011 welds is due to the rough nature of the weld, tends to trap dirt and contaminants, which can cause rusting issues. Which, when you look at the welds from modern equipment like dual shield and spray arc and even hardwire MIG, that leaves far smoother appearance. Even 7018 stick rods are generally better because material can't get stuck on it on the little crevices that are left due to the inconsistent nature of the weld. It was a really nice day out. I lucked out. I've said this in every video I've made on old military equipment, but they need to get with the program and offer like $100 or $200 donation to shoot a round off from something like this. I'd pay it. It's pretty difficult to make a weld around something that small in diameter. I think it was around an inch. They did a pretty good job at that. Again, the roughest welds I found were all on above deck exterior. Realistically, they were all likely welded in position or done vertical up. Due to the size of this, I don't think it'd be feasible to weld this in a flat position like with a crane or something. Another big old gangster weave, and again, it looks like the top was knocked down on this to smooth it out. Overall, not a bad weld for as big as it is. I miss the days of the uncloggable toilets that use like 10 gallons to flush with a flush valve. I miss that. Once again, here's a bunch of those super long welds that look like they were done subarc or some kind of mechanized wire. I'm not really sure. That one looks like it could have been done with a long stick rod, but this next one definitely was not done with stick. If you got an opinion on it, feel free to share it. I really kind of want to know how they did that. I found this hand railing was broken. It was made with gas pipe fittings. Wish I had my cordless battery-powered welder on my truck. I would have taken it and volunteered to fix it for him. Now a couple pictures of some rough welds I found at random points inside of the ship. Here's one where I'm not really sure what they were trying to do here. I think they were trying to patch up a hole that was too big, and they put a bunch of plates on it and kind of tied it all in. I mean, hey, it works and it didn't break, so you have that. To me, this almost looks like it has slag on it and they just didn't chip it off and paint it over it. That's entirely possible. Tucked away far in the ceiling somewhere, tasty asbestos. No doubt most of anything made in World War II is all lead paint, asbestos, probably arsenic and stuff, probably even plutonium. Now, there wasn't a full machine shop on board, but they did have a cool old South Bend lathe, which was from South Bend, Indiana, I would imagine. Just looking at it, even though I'm sure this wasn't a super expensive unit, just the quality was there. I miss the quality of stuff like this. I'm not a machinist, but just looking at this, it must be a joy to use this compared to some modern cheap import. Once again, Milwaukee, Wisconsin labeled on something. Very common on electrical components. A lot of them, at least the company was headquarters in Milwaukee, like Square D, Cutler, Hammer. Those all had offices, if not manufacturing plants in Milwaukee. Allen Bradley is still here in Milwaukee, although most of their manufacturing is in Mexico now, from what I heard. Some pretty clean welds here in the corner. Overall looks pretty good. This ship has been very well taken care for. I can tell because everything was clean and painted well that a lot of money and a lot of love went into getting this ship to where it was when I saw it. Well, just like that, we pretty much went through all the pictures that I took, and the tour's over, I guess. I gotta say, this ship is a lot bigger when you're actually walking through it than what it appears on the outside, because when you walk up to it, you can't really see how wide it is. And I'll be honest, when I read about this thing, I kind of had the opinion, well, how cool could a carrier of tanks and vehicles be? It's probably just like a pontoon boat or catamaran or something like that, and it would just be open and there'd be of nothing of interest. And I was completely wrong on that. I left out a lot of pictures on different sections, like they had a whole cafeteria area or mess hall and a lot of other stuff. So you should definitely go and check this out and spend some time on it. And if you like old equipment, especially old engine rooms, this is 100% worth a stop. As far as how this ship fits in with other World War II ships I've done videos on, which, by the way, if you like this video, there's a link in the description to a bunch of other videos I've made on other ships. But realistically, this ship fits right in for the World War II early 40s vintage. Nothing is too out of place. It seems to be mostly original, and some skilled craftsmen and women, yes, women, welded probably a lot of what's on this ship, because during World War II, a lot of the men went overseas to fight the war and women went to shipyards to work. So both men and women likely worked on this ship. But realistically, they were blue collar heroes as far as I'm concerned. They did a really good job with this ship, and I think they would probably find it pretty interesting that here we are 70 plus years later looking at their work and commenting on it. Anyways, with that said, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you got any comments or questions, feel free to leave them. Until next time.